Greetings, ladies and metalgents, and welcome to this RE016 video, where I take old stories that I've done, update them to modern standards, and read it for your entertainment. This particular story is called White Collar, Bloody Knuckles, written by RegalLegalEagle. Angie sighed as she glanced through her emails. Another couple joked forwards from the other partners about where to buy women's clothes and how to apply makeup. They were always so childish. Then again, it had been her choice to move to the planet far, far from her high-gravity home, Kearns. At 1.2 normal Earth gravity, everyone who lived there was a product of their environment. Shorter, stockier, more muscular, and according to her dating profile inbox, not sought after by the residents of Taratha. At a mere 5'5", she was actually fairly tall for a Kearns colonist. But she was dwarfed in height by most of the other partners of the firm, especially because they wore heels while she didn't. No one from a high-gravity planet wore heels, not even their drag queens. So while many of the other partners scored big clients worth millions or billions of credits and had wonderful nights being chauffeured around with the elite of hegemony society, Angie worked the smaller cases. Her track record was better than any of the other partners, but success only counted for so much amongst the shallow Tarathian upper class. Truthfully, Angie didn't mind all that much, because she believed that her hard work and perseverance would pay off sooner or later. Already she'd gotten a scholarship from a heavy industry colony to a law school, graduated with honors, and was the youngest partner of the firm. The others could socialize and mingle all they wanted, because one day she'd be their boss. She smiled at the thought for a moment before noticing another new email that wasn't a joke. Possibly. Prince Hiram Octavro Junilo Constic Romano the 16th wanted to speak with her about something private and requested a meeting. Angie quickly searched the name to see if someone in the office was pulling her leg. No picture, but the name came up in a local article. One of the visiting dignitaries with a Feck deliberation. Perhaps her time had come early. She quickly replied that she looked forward to this meeting and sent her secretary a notice to expect a potential client. Seeing as she had no idea when the prince might show up, she figured she'd simply work until she heard anything. Several hours later, she saw the notification on her terminal that the prince had arrived. She needed to wrap this call up, but was having trouble with that as she held her face in her hands. "Because you're a mob boss, Domiko. It doesn't matter if the cops can't prove it in court of law. They're still going to operate on the assumption that you're committing crimes. That's how it works. They think you're in charge and they're trying to bring you down. Well, you try to keep from being caught. Why am I explaining this to you?"
"I just don't see why they're always searching my private yacht when I send my kids on a vacation and whatnot. It's harassment, I'm telling you."
"Domiko, that's called customs. All ships have to go through it. If you want to know why they're extra careful when it's your ship, it's because they think you might be using your kid's vacation as a cover for smuggling." Angie sighed. Domiko was currently her best client, a fact she hated.
"Oh, now that's not a bad idea. Thanks for the tip."
"No, don't do that. They're looking for it." "Damn it, Domiko. How the hell have you avoided getting caught?"
"Because I got the best attorney in town. You know I'm always looking out for you. Ever since you first got my legitimate business partner out of that hot water."
Angie shifted her hands and rubbed her eyes now as she thought back on her first big case on Taratha. "For the last time, Domiko, I had no idea that contractor was working for the mob. And stop saying legitimate all the time. Sounds suspicious."
"Yeah, that was a great case too. All legitimate and whatnot. I appreciate the work as always. I don't know what I'd do without you."
He clearly ignored her advice on the word legitimate. "Is that because you honestly can't imagine it, or because every time I try to quit, you threaten to burn down my apartment?"
"Oh, allegedly."
"This isn't the courtroom, Domiko. I have to go now. I've got another client." Angie growled. Before she could end the call, though, he added,
"I'll send you another case of them donuts you like. I've always got your back, kid."
She ended the call with a drawn-out groan. One time, she had mentioned that she really liked Tarathian donuts, and that's all her clients bring her these days. Angie sighed then and got up before walking to her private washroom. She didn't wear makeup like the other partners, but she needed to look good for a prince. Her short amber hair was neat and tidy. Her black suit with the crimson tie was immaculate, and as she opened her mouth and inspected her teeth, she didn't see any food she'd missed. Even so, she took a moment to smooth her hair for a moment and just shake out her limbs as she relaxed and got back into a proper mindset. Leaning forward against the countertop, she looked at her reflection. "You're fierce, you're strong, you're the best." With a nod, she then straightened up and walked into her office and pressed the button to signal her secretary to let the possible client in. Soon the door opened and a figure in a rather plain robe walked into the room. She was a little surprised that the prince would wear something so plain until she noticed the black wand being pulled out of the robe's sleeve. She watched the figure quickly walk the perimeter of her office, waving the wand around. Compared to the other partners, her office was rather small, but with the wood paneling and a view of the Koski Park, she was more than happy with it. Once the figure had walked the room, it just nodded at Angie and then stepped out. Only then did her actual client step in. Angie wasn't normally one much for Xenos, but this one was easy on the eyes. He was tall and slim, wearing a white uniform covered in ribbons and fancy gold epaulets that fit a noble prince. The saber on his hip looked fancy as well, but hardly anyone actually dueled these days. Hardly anyone in the hegemony, at least. His face was covered in a light gold fur with large triangular ears and a short snout. The rest of his body was covered in a uniform except for a bushy, striped black and gold tail. When his blue eyes focused on her, she finally spoke up. "Prince Renuma, I'm Angie." She stepped forward and extended her hand, only to have him stare at it for a moment, obviously confused. "Extend your hand," she said, and waited for him to awkwardly hold out his hand. She gripped it and gave him a firm handshake before letting go. "What brings you to my office?" The prince looked at his hand for a moment before looking back at her. "I wanted to discuss the possibility of hiring your services." "Of course, have a seat." She waved him to one of the leather chairs in front of her desk as she walked around to her side. Before she sat down, though, she pulled out an elaborately decorated mahogany box, extending it to him as she opened it up. "Cigar? Cigarette?" Most Xenos loved tobacco, which is why the hegemony was so careful to keep a monopoly on the stuff. No, thank you. I cough too much." She arched a brow at that before shrugging and putting it away, then taking her seat. "So, why does the prince of a foreign nation need the services of a hegemony lawyer?" "Not just any lawyer. You. I've read reports of your work and watched a few court recordings. Your work is most impressive." He leaned back and then had to shift as he tried to find the best way to position his saber while in the chair. "Why do you want my services then?" she corrected. Because I'm going to get married soon." She noticed the slight look of fear cross his face as he mentioned that. "Congratulations. I'd normally guess that you want to establish a prenup, but since you're a prince, I suspect that's not the case. After all, a hegemony prenup wouldn't hold weight in a royal Fexic court." "That is correct." He nodded and she stared at him for a moment while he shifted in his chair until he finally just removed the sword belt and leaned it against her desk. Then he leaned back and finally comfortable. "I need you to rescue me." Angie stared at the smiling prince as she tried to work that out. "I'm sorry. There might be a translation issue here. You need me to rescue you. You're sitting in my office, and it doesn't look like you're being held captive." "Oh, yes, I see your point. I need to hire you as a hero to return with me to the delegation and sue my family for freedom to not be married." He nodded then while she arched a brow in confusion. "You want me to sue the royal family of the Fexic Empire? Is that correct? I have my suspicions that it won't work. For one, I'm a hegemony lawyer and not very familiar with Fexic law. On top of that, it's the royal family. Can't they just toss the case out? What's wrong with your betrothed anyway?" "She is a Kirschmid." "The flesh-eating beetles?" "Yes, my family thinks that marriage would strengthen our nation for a coming war with the Protectorate. However, I've recently learned that the Kirschmids often eat their mates when they're done, mating." He looked both disgusted and worried about the prospect. "Yes, I could see how that might spoil the honeymoon," Angie muttered. Let's go back for a moment. You said you need a hero, but I'm a lawyer."
Oh, well, there isn't a better term for it in human.
How language is referred to as English, she corrected.
Yes, sorry. It is difficult keeping all the languages straight in my head. I am glad that you're so understanding of my mistakes.
His English was probably better than hers, aside from the minor mistakes here and there. But she didn't tell him that.
The hero is a legal position, sort of our champion or representative for court.
Ah, well, hero in English is a singular masculine term. You do know that I'm not male, yes? With her stout build and muscles, a few Xenos and even some humans had mistaken her for a male over the years.
Why would I think otherwise? Stout features, strong, muscular frame, aggressive attitude. Those are all female characteristics, aren't they?
The prince tilted his head, seeming a little confused by her question, which left Angie to try and decide if this was some incredibly elaborate joke being pulled by the other partners, or if she needed to hone up on the Fexic physiology. For now, she'd keep believing him. Well, the proper term, then, would be heroin.
Isn't that a type of drug?
He asked and tilted his head. No, that would be heroin. Heroine or heroin? She carefully enunciated each word for him to better understand.
Well, then you are the heroine I desire, he smiled.
She closed her eyes and shook her head for a moment as she tried to sort through their conversation. Let me see if I'm understanding you correctly. You want to hire me as a heroine to sue your family into letting you not marry a flesh-eating beetle?
Yes, that is correct. If you're worried about our court system, it is not all that different. There's a judge, a defense, a prosecution. You argue your points, and the judge makes a decision. As I said, I've watched some of your trials. You carry yourself with much confidence and conviction. You'd be perfect.
Well, as a human, I strongly agree with the idea that a person should be free to choose who they marry. This all sounds a bit out of my league.
I insist that it's not. However, you'd need to return with me today to the embassy, as if they discover my absence, they'll make sure to not let me sneak out again, and won't let you enter without me as your escort.
And she shook her head. Now, this really sounds like a bit much. I have no idea what sort of trial to expect. I don't have any documents prepared. Plus, I certainly don't have a defense planned.
I should point out that as one of the oldest princes, I legally own several planets and a small fleet. If you represent me, you'd have incredible riches at your disposal to cover any legal fees and then some. Well, there will be many other resources, I can promise you. A direct 100 million credit bonus for winning the case.
Angie pressed a button on a terminal to open the line to her secretary. Tina, if anyone calls for me, tell them I'll be out of the office for the rest of the day. Then she stood up and motioned for the door. Let's not keep your family waiting then, shall we? The prince smiled and stood, fastened his saber back to his uniform.
You're a natural-born heroine. This is so exciting, like a classical fairy tale where the distressed prince is saved by the strong barbarian from the wastes.
Angie swore on every god that could hear her. If this was some sort of practical joke, she'd be punching people in the face. As they walked out of her office and through the main lobby of the office, they were joined by the prince's silent companion in a plain robe, while the others stared at her in surprise. She just smiled at their shock. Yes, that's right. I'm the one who got hired by the Crown Prince. Not any of you. They were doing an exceptional job hiding it, if they were messing with her. Soon, they were out of the office and walking through Kursky Park. The consulates were just across the park from her office, but she'd never actually been there. So, anything I need to know about what's going to happen? She asked as they walked along gently curving paths that led through the manicured gardens.
My mother will protest, of course. The royal vizier will take her side in the trial. If everything goes well, however, the trial will be over in a few hours.
A few hours? That doesn't give me much time to formulate a defense, Angie protested.
I'm telling you that once you're in the midst of the trial, it'll come naturally. You've got all the instincts already. Besides, I'm the one who's really at risk if you lose.
Angie shrugged a little, conceding his point. Soon they were through the park and approaching the impressive estate that served as a Fexic consulate. It looked like one of the museums her partners visited to mingle with their clients. There were some very stout-looking guards in front of the entrance that looked very different from the prince. In fact, they looked much more like Angie herself, stout and muscular. Their ears were also rounded, and their tails lacked the stripes the prince had. The gleaming laser pikes they held were also old-fashioned, but the shotguns at their belts were brand new. They looked a little confused as the prince walked up to the stairs to the entrance to the consulate, but didn't stop him. Once they were inside, he shouted something in his own language that got the attention of the various Fexics around them, and many gasps. Then it was a whirlwind of activity that completely confused Angie. None of them was speaking English, but she kept getting ushered around with the prince. She met with some doctors who ran a quick scan on her, then some officials in uniforms not quite as fancy as the prince's, but then the royal family itself. The entire time she just stood by the prince, listening to them growl and yell back and forth in a language she didn't understand. What she did finally understand was why he wasn't fazed by her appearance. The queen, the other females of the court family, were all stocky and muscular, their rounded ears and stripeless tails also indicating their gender, apparently. She was so used to dealing with other humans, she totally forgot plenty of other species had very distinct gender dimorphisms. Either way, just like he'd said, the queen was pissed. The other nobility were shocked, but seemed to agree with something the prince was saying. Eventually, she was face to face with a Fexic that was wearing some sort of leather armor. She had grey fur, but blue paint drawn in patterns along her exposed arms and legs. The Grand Vizier, apparently, as the prince finally started to translate. Before the trial begins, you're allowed to choose how to proceed. If you want to change your attire or get any other objects for your defense. My attire? This is the only suit I got. You made this seem urgent, so I came along. I don't even have my briefcase, papers, or tablet, so I'll have to make do with my wits, I suppose. The prince spoke to the others, and there were gasps and murmurs, which made her feel like there were several things that she wasn't being told. Very traditional, they respect that, the prince said with a nod. Then he led her down the stairs, and they were soon in a circular pit with a sandy floor. Nobles were taking seats up above the pit, and there was a very old-looking Fexic woman who shuffled out in a massive throne. The queen only got to sit next to her, so perhaps the old woman was the judge? Where are we? Angie asked as she looked up at the Xenos. We're in court. I wish you luck. He patted her shoulder and quickly left while she looked around the sandy pit, confused, as the vizier soon joined her, now wearing a set of simple clothing instead of armor from earlier. The court is now in session, the old woman up top whispered, but her voice was projected by speakers set in the walls. As the defense for the royal family, the vizier argues first. She nodded to the vizier, who nodded back. Angie expected them to explain how this would all work, but instead, as she turned to face the vizier, the Xeno punched her in the face. The royal family is beholden to the interests of the people. Angie staggered back before recovering, and then quickly ducking under another swing. The vizier growled, and then quickly darted forward and landed a body blow to Angie's stomach, making her gasp out. The emotions of an individual prince are not grounds for changing foreign relations. Angie pulled her arms up, then started blocking the incoming blows. But even though she was blocking the attacks from doing much, it allowed the vizier to keep talking. Our empire operates in the interest of strengthening its people and extending its borders. Our traditions date back centuries. No member of the hegemony holds title based on heritage, and such offers no benefit to the royal family. This heroine shall be dispatched. The prince shall submit, and the marriage with the Kirschmensch shall continue. Angie panted a bit as the vizier pulled back. Her ribs hurt. There was some blood dripping from her lips, and her arms were sore from trying to block those punches. But more importantly, she was pissed. The prosecution is now free to argue, the old Fexic murmured. Angie darted forward, arms up. She feigned a straight jab, waiting for the vizier to tense, for it to only surprise her by kicking the vizier in the shin. As the Xeno stumbled a bit, Angie did actually follow through with a punch, feeling her fist glance the vizier's cheek. How can a royal family claim to operate in the best interest of their people if they force their own children to political unions devoid of choice or concern? As the vizier staggered back and pulled her own arms up in defense, Angie quickly followed, delivering 2 successive hooks into the Xenos' ribs. Furthermore, the reason the hegemony does not have hereditary titles is because this was found to result in inbreeding and stagnation as a small elite held on to almost all the power. The hegemony believes in equality in titles based on ability. Angie lined herself up for a jab and noticed the vizier shifting, expecting another kick. So instead, she just leaned all into it, punching the vizier's raised hand hard enough to make the vizier essentially hit herself in the face. Tradition and force are not effective methods of ruling. The vizier staggered back once more, and Angie followed up by punching her in the stomach. Freedom is the only path to a modern, productive, and happy society. The vizier was still reading, and Angie wanted to end this. It was time to really show them not to mess with a woman born and raised on a high-gravity planet. A woman who'd worked out in a high-gravity gym every day to make sure she didn't lose her muscle tone. She gripped the vizier's hands, putting them away from her face before Angie tilted her head back and then smashed her forehead into the vizier's snout, the Xeno's head snapping back as Angie felt a distinct crunch and saw blood fly out of the Xeno's nose. As the vizier hit the sandy floor of the court, clearly unconscious, Angie shouted, "Therefore, my client should be free to marry who he wants. The prosecution rests." She was panting a bit, feeling aggressive and on edge still. "Does the defense have any further arguments?" the old Xeno up top asked, and as the unconscious vizier clearly didn't respond, she said, "The defense rests, I find, in favor of the prosecution. The prince has made his decision." And you could hear gasps and murmurs of the nobles up top as the queen rose and stomped off. Soon, though, the door opened and the prince rushed into the court, hugging Angie. "That was incredible! I told you, you were amazing! No one has defeated the vizier in a single round before! You've saved me from my evil mother." Angie was grinning now, carried away in the moment. "Yeah, I showed her how humans practice law. It's the greatest trial I've ever been in." "So you'll be my heroine for life then?" Yeah, sure." "Excellent! We'll have the wedding immediately. I can't believe I've got you for a wife. I promise to be the best husband possible." "Yeah," Angie grinned as the words hit her. Wait, what? End of story. I would just quickly like to thank the T5 peeps: Dragon Soup, Cold War Boomerwaffen, Severin Cerberus, Red Panda 121, Leslie 517, Bushmaster 177, Caspar Arnold, Cam Maxwell, Sans the Skeleton, Light Jock, Dragzoon WRE, and Lord Azrakal. Thank you very much.